Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we return today for episode 72 of Untold Evidence. We can't get too far away with them. We're back again at the CIA, and the year is 1953. A panel of America's top scientists, meeting in a secret under CIA sponsorship, made a written recommendation to the United States government. Their recommendation was not to investigate UFOs. Curious. It was actively to debunk them, to use the mass media to reduce public interest and to clear the channels of public discussion. Well, I never. This is not speculation. The report is declassified. The link is in the description. It's called the Robertson Panel Report. To understand the Robertson Panel Report, you have to stand in the summer of 1952, and that's exactly where we're going to. Across 2 weekends in July of that year, multiple unidentified objects were tracked on radar over Washington, D.C., tracked by civilian aircraft controllers, tracked by military radar, spotted visually by aeroplane pilots and fighter pilots scrambling to intercept them. The story was on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The Air Force held its largest press conference since World War II. And the CIA was watching. Not because they believed in UFOs, because they were worried about the panic that would ensure the national security during the Cold War. The reasoning was specific. If American air defense radar channels were saturated with UFO reports, a real Soviet attack could come through the noise unnoticed. The phenomenon, in their view, was not a threat. So they convened a panel, and they convened it in secret. Now, reading that briefly, annoyingly with disclosure at times, the reason to keep it hidden does make sense. We've spoken about in a few different episodes how it is impossible to get full disclosure. And during the Cold War, I don't think the world knew quite what the enemy was. We were fighting enemies on different fronts and potentially in different realms. So having the Russians and the Soviets on the one side, they were the immediate threat. The West had to fight back accordingly and with strategy. So what happened? The panel met for 5 days in January 1953, less than a working week. Its chairman was H.P. Robertson, a physicist at the California Institute of Technology. Its members included Luis Alvarez, who would later win the Nobel Prize in Physics, Lloyd Berkner, one of the architects of the International Geophysical Year, Samuel Goudsmit, the physicist who had led the wartime also missions, and Thornton Page, an astronomer. They were not cranks. They were among the most credentialed scientists the United States could put in any given room on the subject. They reviewed the best cases, films of UFO sightings, radar tracks, witness statements. They accumulated files of Project Blue Book, and after 5 days they wrote a report. Now, before we get to the recommendations, the careful half, because this case gets distorted in both directions, and as ever, we want to be honest. So first, the panel did not conclude there was an alien cover-up. It did not conclude there was anything supernatural. It concluded, after reviewing the cases, that most of the sightings it examined had conventional explanations: astronomical phenomena, atmospheric effects, aircrafts, and even balloons. A small residue remained unexplained, but unexplained is not the same as proof. Second, the panel's national security concern was real, and it was rational. 1953 was the height of the early years of the Cold War. The thought that a Soviet first strike could come hidden in a saturation of UFO reports was, in that context, a serious operational worry. I think in using hindsight and historical data, that is a fair assumption. The motive for the recommendation was not to hide aliens, it was to keep American radar channels clean. And third, the panel members were qualified. Whatever you think of their conclusions, they were not credulous, and they were not corrupt. They looked at the evidence available to them and reached the verdict they reached on its merits. Now hold all of that, and now let's hold this, which is also true. What the panel recommended in writing was a program of active debunking. They wrote that the public's interest in UFOs should be reduced deliberately through mass media, through education, through cultivation in popular culture of the idea that UFOs were not real and not worth thinking about. And they specifically suggested that this campaign might involve mainstream media outlets. The report named names: Disney Animation Studios, major newspapers, the infrastructure of mid-century mass communication, directed by recommendation of the CIA-sponsored panel towards shaping what the American public thought about a documented and unresolved phenomenon. That is the part that endures, not the conclusion that most UFO sightings have conventional explanations. That conclusion, on the available evidence, could well probably be correct. The part that endures is the recommendation to actively manage public belief. Because once you have done that once, even for the reasons you consider sound, you set a precedent. And this is something I think humanity and modern humanity have really lost. We've set some incredibly ambiguous, sometimes silly precedents in the past that we feel we need to hold to now. And I think in a day and age of social media, the internet and access online, it is unmanageable to keep that rhetoric ahead and continued. At some point, we need a level of honesty, because it is things like this that, when the government are telling us the truth and is needed, quite clearly brings skepticism. Like, I, for one, when I read these things and I see written evidence, a document trail that admits that the biggest country in the world is going to lie to everyone for their own need, how can I trust them in the future? I ask you guys the same question. Drop in the comments. Where do you stand on this? Do the government always tell us the truth? Do the government always lie to us? So we're back in the room, and a panel of scientists advising the government that the right response to an unresolved phenomenon is to manage public perception rather than to publicly investigate. What the Robertson panel really teaches us is something quieter than aliens. It is a document about how a government decides what its public is allowed to take seriously. Exactly the point. Is it their right to tell us what is real and what is not, what we can know and what we can't know? In a year of genuine Cold War danger, a panel of qualified scientists, with arguably reasonable motives, decided that one of the answers was to dampen public curiosity about a phenomenon, to shape through media what people thought about the sky. The conclusion may have been right. The recommendations may have been understandable. And it still set a pattern that has shaped how every later UFO inquiry has been received for over 70 years. Once the official position becomes "do not take this seriously," the burden of proof on anyone who does take it seriously is permanently higher. The full Robertson Report panel is in the National Archive. Read it for yourself. Tell me in the comments. At what point does national security justify managing public belief? And at what point is it just a full-on cover-up? Now, as interesting as this story is, and it really is, drop in the comments your wider view, because I'm sure we can all think of instances over the last 25 years where we don't think our respected governments are telling us the truth. What are your guys' lines? Where can you understand disclosure? Where do you abhor disclosure? We're all in it together, and we all want to follow the evidence. For now, our episode ends, but our journey remains ongoing. Thank you very much for joining us in episode 72, and we will see you in the next one.